Tonight we slip off your sneakers, step out of the hum of traffic, and step into a medieval inn where the shadows dance on uneven plaster walls and smoke curls like lazy grey ribbons above a roaring, but not nearly big enough, fire. The air smells like wood ash and wet wool. Your boots squelch because, of course, it rained all day, and now your only dream is sinking into something soft, warm, and, well, sanitary. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without a rash or two. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the creaky oak door, and the warmth hits, not like a gentle summer breeze, but more like someone holding a candle 6 feet away. There's a common room, full of muttering travelers hunched over wooden bowls, their cloaks steaming like overcooked vegetables. In the corner, a blackened hearth strains against a pile of logs, its orange glow doing its best, but in truth, you can feel the cold drafting in through every crack in the wattle and daub walls. You shake off your cloak and glance toward the beds, expecting some soft mattress to rescue your freezing limbs. Joke's on you. What you get is straw. Not fresh meadow straw, all golden and Instagram-worthy. No, this is tired, flattened straw that has seen more nights than your childhood teddy bear. It sits stuffed inside a rough linen tick, tied off like a sad sack of turnips. You poke it with your boot. It crunches faintly, like stale cereal. You tell yourself, it's fine, rustic charm, right? But deep down, you're thinking about all the bugs you've heard stories about. Historians still argue whether straw ticks were changed monthly or annually, if at all. Many inns advertised fresh bedding like a Michelin star, but fresh often meant someone shook it out the window and called it a day. And here's the kicker, some places mixed in dried herbs, like lavender or pennyroyal, to mask the smell and maybe, just maybe, repel fleas. Did it work? Debatable. But hey, at least it smelled like someone cared. As you lower yourself onto the bed, the smoky air clings to your clothes, soaking into your hair like an unwanted perfume. The smoke wasn't just for aesthetics, it was survival. Inns were notorious for poor insulation, so the only thing standing between you and hypothermia was that meager fire and the hope your body heat would do the rest. And speaking of that fire, did you notice how everything smells faintly of ham? That's not your dinner talking. Back then, people hung meat in the rafters above the hearth to cure. So while you're trying to warm your frozen fingers, you're basically slow smoking next month's supper. Bonus feature, when the wind shifts, the smoke doesn't rise, it billows around the room like an indecisive ghost, stinging your eyes and clinging to your lungs. Romantic, right? Quirky fact time. Some inns stored bed straw near the kitchen because they believed the warmth of cooking would season it, like bedding was a stew you could simmer for comfort. Imagine rolling over at midnight, wondering why your pillow smells faintly of cabbage. Cozy. You lie down, the straw rustles, and your back feels every knot and twig. You pull your cloak tighter and think, this is fine. People survived this. True, but not without issues. Those straw ticks harbored more life than a nature documentary, lice, fleas, and the occasional beetle just trying to live its best life. Remember how your day started in the rain? Yeah, congratulations, now you're sharing space with damp straw. Which, by the way, turns into a petri dish for mildew faster than you can say, refund, please. And yet, people kept coming back. Because the alternative? Sleeping outside with wolves and the kind of darkness you only see when you turn off all your modern comforts. Inns, for all their flaws, were your lifeline on the road. The smoky warmth, the laughter in the next room, even the creak of bed ropes, it all whispered safety in a world where bandits roamed and frostbite wasn't just a fun trivia term. Now, close your eyes for a second and picture it. The fire dimming to embers, shadows thickening on the plaster walls, the smell of damp wool, wood smoke, and ale curling in the air. You shift on the straw mattress, every rustle sounding louder than your heartbeat, and you wonder if the itch on your ankle is imaginary or the beginning of a medieval friendship bracelet courtesy of a flea. Don't worry, we're just getting started. This was the welcome mat. The real tricks to staying warm, the hacks, the desperate measures. Oh, they're coming. And some of them involve things you wouldn't expect to share your bed with, besides that stranger you met an hour ago. Unknown hour, your ears catching the low groan of wind sneaking through the cracks in the shutters, dragging icy fingers across the room. The fire, you glance toward it, has collapsed into a mound of sullen, glowing embers, like the last party guests who refused to leave. Welcome to the fireside economy, medieval edition. If you thought that giant hearth was going to keep everyone toasty all night, oh, sweet summer child, prepare to shiver. That fire wasn't just decor, it was survival. But here's the kicker, wood wasn't cheap. Not in a Europe where forests were disappearing faster than your patience. By the 14th century, entire regions complained about timber shortages. So innkeepers treated logs like liquid gold. Every extra stick thrown on that blaze cost them, and trust me, they weren't doing it for your rosy cheeks. One hearth for dozens of guests meant everyone was stuck negotiating proximity like it was prime real estate. The closer you sat, the warmer you felt, but the closer you sat, the smokier you got. And nobody had invented Febreze yet. You shuffle toward the hearth, claiming a spot near a chair leg, when you realize something grim. People paid for heat. Not always officially, but in the little nods, the whispered agreements, the coins slipped across a table. Inns often sold warmth the way coffee shops now sell extra whipped cream. Want another log? That'll be 2 pennies. Thinking about keeping the fire going past midnight? Better know the innkeeper's favorite song, because you're about to sing it with gusto. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just a sneaky upsell at busy crossroads, but one thing's clear, heat was a commodity. And then there's peat. Smoldering, smoky, earthy peat. In regions like Ireland or Scotland, wood shortages turned innkeepers into amateur chemists, figuring out how to keep the hearth alive with what was basically dried mud. Did it work? Sure, if you liked the aroma of a wet bog clinging to your soul. But peat burned long and steady, so even if the heat was mild, it outlasted most wood fires. You'd smell like the underside of a swamp troll by morning, but hey, you'd still have toes. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some inns practiced what I'll call ember banking. They'd tuck glowing embers into ash at night, like hiding treasure in a sandbox, to rekindle the fire in the morning without wasting a fresh log. Sounds clever until you realize the line between banked ember and oops, we burned down the place was dangerously thin. More than one medieval inn ended its career as a pile of cinders because someone got lazy with the ash. You lean in, palms out, soaking what little heat the fire still gives, and you notice the crowd. Everyone's huddled like penguins, faces flushed on one side, blue on the other. There's laughter, sure, but under it, the sharp edge of survival. This is why common rooms mattered. You didn't stay in your private chamber assuming you had one, because it was colder than a tax collector's heart. You stayed here, circling the fire like moths, trading gossip, sipping ale, and pretending not to notice when the guy across from you started nodding off into his bowl of pottage. And let's talk about smoke. Modern fireplaces draw smoke up and away, but medieval chimneys were about as reliable as your phone on 1% battery. Sometimes the draft worked. Sometimes the smoke just hung there, fat and greasy, turning the ceiling black and your lungs grey. You cough, eyes stinging, thinking, it's fine. Builds character. But the reality? Smoke inhalation was practically a rite of passage. No wonder medieval folks had raspy voices, they were basically chain-smoking fireplaces their whole lives. You shift closer anyway, because cold wins every argument. The heat doesn't just warm your fingers, it softens the edge of fear, the constant hum of vulnerability that travel always brings. For a moment, you let yourself imagine comfort. The fire blazing high, the room bright with warmth, no drafts nibbling at your ankles. And then a log collapses with a hiss, sparks shooting up like tiny comets, and the illusion shatters. You remember the rule: fire is precious, fire is rationed, and tomorrow, when you leave at dawn, you'll carry that chill in your bones like an unwanted souvenir. One more detail to chew on before you drift back to your straw sanctuary: not all fires burned in hearths. Some inns, desperate or just plain stingy, used portable braziers, a metal pan of glowing coals plunked in the center of the room. Cozy? Sure, until someone trips over it in the dark and sets the rush-covered floor ablaze. There's a reason medieval records include so many mysterious in fires. Spoiler: it wasn't always bandits. So you stand there, palms warm, back cold, face pink from smoke, and think, maybe, just maybe, survival tonight depends on finding a better trick than this. And trust me, the next tricks, they'll make you appreciate central heating like never before. You drag yourself back to the sleeping area, eyes watering from the smoke, cheeks raw from alternating heat and cold. You think your biggest problem is the icy draft curling along the floor like a cat with an attitude, but no. The real shocker awaits in bed. Or should I say, beds, plural. Because here's the deal: you don't get one. Not a single, private, Instagram-worthy mattress all to yourself. Nope. You're about to share a bed with a stranger, or three, because in medieval inns, sleeping solo was rarer than a hygienic latrine. Space was scarce, and warmth was precious, so beds doubled, tripled, sometimes quadrupled as communal bunkers. Bed sharing wasn't a quirky Airbnb feature. It was survival economics. You peel back the scratchy wool blanket, which smells like wet sheep because, spoiler alert, it was wet sheep, and there they are, two figures, already snoring like competing bagpipes, limbs akimbo. You freeze, mind doing frantic math. Where am I supposed to fit? Historians still argue whether bedfellows were randomly assigned or matched by gender or social status. Some records suggest inns tried to keep men with men and women with women, but, let's just say reality probably blurred those lines on busy nights. If the place was packed, you didn't get picky. You got horizontal and hoped the guy next to you didn't have the plague or a dagger under his pillow. You gingerly climb in, doing that awkward shuffle where you try not to brush anyone's anything. The straw crunches, your cloak tangles, and you wedge yourself between two warm bodies. Suddenly, you're very aware of how intimate this is. Body heat radiates like you've joined a medieval human panini press. On the plus side, you're not shivering anymore. On the minus side, you're now part of a sleep arrangement that makes a subway at rush hour look spacious. And here's your first etiquette lesson: no starfishing. Space is life. You keep your arms tucked, legs straight, and pray nobody rolls over. Talking? Optional. Snoring? Guaranteed. And don't even think about kicking off your boots unless you want to fumigate the entire bed with eau de muddy road. Quirky tidbit: some travelers actually paid extra for the privilege of removing shoes indoors because that was considered premium service. So yes, the guy hogging the blanket might also be the guy who slipped the innkeeper a coin for sock privileges. You lie there, breathing shallowly because the smell is a lot. Sweat, smoke, and a tangy note of ale from the stranger whose head is now practically on your shoulder. You tell yourself this is normal, because it was. In fact, sharing beds wasn't limited to inns. Wealthy households did it too. Servants slept in the same room as masters, and even noble families doubled up. Beds weren't personal, they were infrastructure. But let's not sugarcoat it. This cozy scene came with hazards. Lice and fleas loved communal warmth like influencers love ring lights. If one sleeper had them, congratulations, you all did by sunrise. And remember disease. Yeah. Close quarters made inns the original germ-sharing networks. Some chroniclers even grumbled that beds were markets of sickness, which sounds dramatic until you picture medieval flu season in a room of 20 travelers breathing the same smoky air. Here's something that will make you squirm. Some inns didn't even bother with multiple beds. They laid down long pallets or heaps of straw, and everyone crashed shoulder to shoulder like sardines in homespun tunics. Privacy? A myth. You learned to sleep with your coin purse under your arm and your hand on your dagger, because yes, theft happened. Not always, but enough to make you paranoid. And yet, in this world, trust was the ultimate blanket. You hoped the stranger next to you valued warmth more than your belongings. Now, a fun mental image. Imagine rolling over at 2 a.m. and meeting the wide eyes of a stranger whispering, "Cold, isn't it?" Romantic comedy? Nope. Just another Tuesday in 1387. And you can forget about the concept of personal space. That wasn't a phrase yet. If someone elbowed you in the ribs, you took it like a champ, because the alternative was frostbite. But here's the kicker. Many travelers actually liked the camaraderie. After long days of lonely roads and lurking danger, falling asleep surrounded by breathing bodies felt safe. Humans are social creatures, and in that smoky inn, pressed between strangers, you weren't alone in the big, dark world. So as you close your eyes, trying to ignore the itchy tickle on your ankle, probably straw, probably, you let the hum of snores lull you. For a moment, it almost feels warm, almost feels comforting, until someone coughs directly into your ear. Congratulations! You're living the medieval dream. Don't worry, though, the inn's got tricks to make this even better. Wait until you see what they slide under the blankets next. You wake, or maybe you never really slept. Hard to say when every time you drifted off, someone snorted like a dying goose or an elbow jabbed your ribs with the subtlety of a battering ram. The fire in the next room is stone cold now, the embers a pale memory buried in grey ash. Your body is stiff, your breath hangs in little ghost puffs above your face, and the straw mattress, it's biting back. Scratch, scratch, scratch. No, that's not a mouse in the corner, that's you, clawing at your own ankle because something down there is throwing a party. Welcome to the glamorous world of bedbugs, lice, and the occasional flea. If you thought sharing a bed with strangers was awkward, try sharing it with an entire ecosystem. Here's the reality. Medieval inns fought a losing battle against pests. Straw mattresses were perfect breeding grounds for lice and fleas. Damp straw plus body heat equals bug Disneyland. You could boil the ticks, the linen sacks holding the straw, in a cauldron of water to kill the freeloaders, but that took effort. Did every innkeeper bother? Historians still argue about that, and frankly, judging by some colorful complaints from travelers, the answer was often absolutely not. And then there's the bedbugs, tiny vampires who considered your toes a midnight buffet. The word bedbug doesn't appear in English until later, but trust me, the pests were there. They lived in the seams, cracks, even the rope supports of the bed frame. No linen barrier was thick enough to stop them if they were hungry. And they were always hungry. Quirky tidbit for you, some innkeepers swore by herbal tricks. They'd scatter pennyroyal, lavender, or wormwood in the straw, hoping the smell would repel bugs, or at least fool guests into thinking something was being done. Did it work? Maybe for a while. But bugs are stubborn little freeloaders. Odds are they just shrugged and thought, spa day. You shift, trying not to move too much because every rustle feels like an open invitation for more crawling sensations. Your mind spirals. Was that an itch on your calf, or just your imagination? You pull your cloak tighter, as if wool can guard against what's lurking in the dark. And then you notice the smell, a damp, sour tang clinging to the bedding like a bad decision. Boiling straw might kill pests, but it also left the ticks damp if not properly dried. Result: musty funk with a hint of mildew. Romantic. Innkeepers weren't oblivious. They knew guests hated pests almost as much as they hated freezing. So boiling bedding was the gold standard where it could be done. Huge copper kettles of water would bubble in the kitchen or over the hearth, and straw ticks would take turns in a boiling spa treatment. Theoretically, it worked. Practically, it was labor-intensive, and in a world where time was money and wood was expensive, plenty of inns skipped the step unless an infestation was so bad the bedding practically crawled on its own. And here's a fun scholarly debate. Were fleas considered normal background noise, like today's mosquitoes, or a true horror story? Some argue medieval folks just tolerated them, shrugging off bites like a minor inconvenience. Others think travelers dreaded the itch, especially since fleas were infamous disease carriers. Remember the Black Death? Yeah, thank the flea. You probably don't want to think about that while lying in a communal bed, but there it is. Sweet dreams. Of course, if you were fancy or just lucky, you could request fresh straw. That didn't mean new linen, just straw that wasn't yet compressed into oblivion and colonized by insects. For the price of a coin, you might even get the tick refilled entirely. But most travelers weren't dropping extra pennies on bedding when they had miles to go and wallets as thin as their shoes. The worst part: no easy fix existed. You couldn't douse the bed in pesticides because those weren't invented yet. You couldn't call pest control because the only exterminator was a pot of boiling water and maybe a cat for the mice. So you endured. You scratched. You prayed the itching would stop before morning. And through all this misery, the irony hits you: these bugs were practically part of the business model. They thrived because humans needed warmth, and warmth required clustering together. Where there's a crowd, there's a buffet. Fleas loved medieval inns almost as much as modern influencers love ring lights. You roll over, tugging the blanket like it owes you money, and stare into the dark, thinking about what fresh torments tomorrow might bring. The answer: fire in your bed, but not in the fun way. The innkeeper has a solution for the cold that might just set your straw mattress ablaze. Morning drags past like a mule in deep mud. You finally surrender to the inevitable. There's no winning a fight with bedbugs and a straw tick that feels like sleeping on a bag of crunchy turnips. Your joints ache, your cloak smells like smoky despair, and your toes? Numb, except for that one that might be considering frostbite as a career option. Time for reinforcements, the innkeeper's secret weapons for warmth. You shuffle back into the common room, where the fire is sulking in its hearth like it partied too hard last night. Someone mutters something about breakfast, but you're distracted by a sight that, frankly, looks like a medieval torture device: a long-handled metal pan with a lid, hanging on the wall like an executioner's spare helmet. The innkeeper grabs it, stuffs a glowing ember inside, and suddenly, you realize you're looking at the era's hottest bedtime accessory, the bed warmer. This thing was the medieval equivalent of an electric blanket, minus the electricity and the safety standards. The idea was simple: fill the pan with embers or hot coals, slide it between the sheets, and let the heat chase away the frost. Easy, right? Wrong. Because if you lingered too long in one spot, that nice linen blanket turned into a pyre faster than you could say, "Oops, there goes the mattress." Historians still argue how many fires these things caused, but let's just say enough to make every insurance underwriter of the future nod knowingly. And if you couldn't afford a fancy brass pan? No problem, hot bricks to the rescue. Innkeepers or even travelers themselves would heat bricks by the hearth, wrap them in rags or slip them into wooden boxes, then tuck them near their feet under the covers. Sounds charming until the brick scorches through the cloth at 2 a.m. and brands your shin like you're a wayward calf. Pro tip: don't kick the brick in your sleep unless you enjoy surprise third-degree burns. Now here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some folks swore by filling earthenware pots with hot water instead of coals or bricks. Yes, the original hot water bottle, except heavier, riskier, and likely to crack if you breathed on it wrong. And then there were iron foot warmers, which worked like portable braziers. Drop in embers, close the grate, and tuck it near your feet. Cozy. Until the iron overheats and melts the soles of your shoes, or your sense of calm when sparks start popping like a 14th century fireworks show. Of course, bed warmers weren't just about comfort, they were status symbols. A gleaming brass pan told the world, I have money, and I will not freeze like a peasant. If you were lucky enough to have one slid into your bed at an inn, congratulations, you either tipped well, or the innkeeper decided you looked important enough not to sue when your bed caught fire. Here's the part nobody tells you, all these tricks were temporary. A few minutes of bliss, then back to icy reality. Embers cooled. Bricks lost heat. Water pots chilled into sad lumps of ceramic disappointment. Which meant, you guessed it, someone had to get out of bed and reheat the thing. And by someone, I mean probably you, because medieval room service wasn't a thing. You stumble across freezing floorboards, your breath puffing like smoke signals, muttering curses in a language only frost understands. But hey, at least the warmers made a difference for those who could afford them. If you were broke or stuck in a crowded inn with no extras, you had other tricks, like doubling your cloak, spooning with strangers, high again, communal bed, or praying the horse stables weren't locked for the night. Because sometimes, the heat rising from a barn beat whatever fire hazard the innkeeper was peddling. Still, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity. In a world without radiators or thermostats, people turned danger into comfort. They wielded fire like a tool, a gamble, a hope. Every ember tucked into a pan, every brick glowing faintly red, it all whispered the same promise. Maybe tonight, you'll sleep warm. You glance at the bed warmer as the innkeeper slides it back onto the wall, its metal darkened with soot. It looks innocent enough now, but you know the truth. That thing is a coin toss between cozy dreams and full-blown arson. And with that cheerful thought, you head back to your bed, the blanket stiff from cold, wondering how long before someone invents something that won't cook your feet like medieval rotisserie. Don't worry, the next solution won't involve fire. Just fur, cloaks, and more layers than a fashion influencer in January. Ready to dress for survival? Because that's what comes next. You flop back on your straw mattress. Well, flop is generous. More like you lower yourself gingerly, because one wrong shift and a rogue twig will jab you like it's auditioning for sharpest object of the year. The bed warmer did its job, briefly. Now, the sheets are already sliding back to their natural state, refrigerator chic. Time for Plan B, layers. And not just throw on an extra hoodie layers. We're talking the medieval version of a survival burrito. Cloaks, doublets, hose, tunics, everything you own gets piled on your body because fabric equals heat, and heat equals not waking up as a popsicle. You glance at your travel bag and laugh, quietly, because the guy next to you has a dagger and zero chill. That bag. It's full of salvation. Every garment is a soldier in the war against frostbite. Start with your base, linen shift or shirt. Feels soft now, but give it a few days on the road without washing, and it'll develop a personality of its own. Next, wool tunic. Because wool? That's the superhero of medieval fabric. Warm when wet, sturdy as your grandmother's morals, and itchy enough to keep you awake during sermons. You add hose, wool again, because bare legs in January? That's how you end up in an early grave or at least an unpleasant ballad. Then, your cloak, thick, heavy, and probably smelling faintly of every road you've walked. Historians still argue whether travelers actually slept fully clothed out of necessity or modesty, but here's a spoiler, they did both. The bed wasn't exactly a luxury suite, so stripping down wasn't always an option. Plus, if you're hitting the road at dawn, do you really want to wrestle your limbs into frozen hose in the dark? No thanks. Sleep dressed. That's the rule. Quirky tidbit, fur was the medieval status flex. Line your cloak with fox, squirrel, or ermine, and suddenly you weren't just warm, you were making a statement. Even lower-ranked travelers sometimes wore rabbit fur, stitched into linings or cuffs for a hint of extra insulation. The really fancy folks, they had entire garments trimmed with mink or sable, strutting through the inn like a woolen Kardashian. But careful, flash too much fur in a common room, and you might wake up light on both cloak and coin. Now imagine this. You're wrapped in everything you own, a wool burrito in a smoky, drafty room. You feel, not warm exactly, but less like your blood is crystallizing. Problem solved? Ha! Not even close. Because layers can't fix one crucial flaw, the damp. Medieval Europe was basically a long-running experiment in humidity. Rain-soaked cloaks, sweat from long rides, the ever-present mist creeping in like an uninvited guest, it all conspired to keep you clammy. And damp clothes are traitors. They rob heat faster than a tax collector in plague season. What did travelers do? They dried garments near the hearth when possible, hanging cloaks on pegs so close to the flames they occasionally caught a little too much enthusiasm and went up like bonfire starters. Inns smelled of scorched wool for a reason. And if there wasn't room by the fire, you wore the damp. You slept in it. You cursed it under your breath while pulling your hood tighter. But layers weren't just clothes, they were shields against bugs too. Tuck your tunic into your hose, cloak over your head, and you've got a medieval hazmat suit. Fleas might still find their way in, but at least you've raised the bar for effort. And don't forget the hat. Always a hat. Heat escapes through your head faster than gossip in a small village. A wool coif or cap wasn't fashion, it was survival. As you lie there, bundled to oblivion, you wonder if you can even breathe under all this fabric. Your arms feel like sausages in a casing. You shift, and the bed ropes creak ominously, like they're debating whether to dump you on the floor. Comfort. Forget it. You're going for alive by dawn. And honestly, that's enough. Here's the funny part. People got used to this. Travelers expected to sleep dressed, expected the weight of cloaks pinning them down like a judgmental grandmother. It was normal. Modern folks complain about scratchy hotel sheets. Imagine telling them you spent the night in 3 tunics and a hood, praying your toes didn't turn blue. So you settle in, breath fogging the air, every muscle stiff under wool. Somewhere in the dark, someone mutters, someone coughs, someone's teeth chatter like castanets. You close your eyes and picture the summer sun, warm and golden, then snap back to reality when a droplet of condensation lands on your nose from the rafter above. Congratulations! You've hit peak medieval cozy. But hold tight, we're not done layering yet. Because what if you ditch the bed entirely and climb somewhere warmer? Tomorrow night, maybe you'll sleep with the horses and love it. You wake with a stiff neck and a newfound appreciation for central heating. Your cocoon of wool and damp dreams did its best, but you're still cold enough to envy the icicles on the windowsill. So, what's next? You gather your cloak, shuffle downstairs, and catch a whiff of something earthy. Then you hear it, the low, rhythmic snort of a horse, the shuffle of hooves, the creak of leather tack. And you think, maybe I've been doing this all wrong. Because here's the truth. Sometimes the warmest bed in the house wasn't a bed at all, it was above the stables. Yep. A hayloft, nestled over steaming piles of manure and a row of content, hay-munching horses, could feel like a medieval spa compared to that icy guest room. You push open the loft door, and a wave of warm, humid air kisses your frozen cheeks like a lover with questionable hygiene. Romantic? Maybe not. But practical? Oh yes. Picture it. The hayloft floor is thick with straw, freshly piled and fragrant, not yet compressed into misery like your own mattress. You climb the ladder, hands gripping rough wood, and emerge into a golden sea that smells faintly sweet, though the undertone of horse perfume is impossible to ignore. Beneath you, the animals shift and snort, their body heat rising in soft, invisible clouds. Who needs a hearth when you've got a dozen biological radiators right below? Historians still argue whether travelers paid extra for hayloft privileges or just bribed a stable boy with a coin and a wink. Records suggest some inns offered barn lodging as a budget option, particularly for the penniless. It wasn't glamorous, but it was warm, and warmth trumped dignity every time. And hey, compared to bedbugs and a mattress that smelled like last year's mud, this was practically 5-star. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval folks believed horse breath was healthful, seriously. Physicians in the Middle Ages sometimes prescribed spending time in stables for respiratory ailments, convinced the warm, moist air had healing powers. So congratulations. While you're lying up there inhaling odor equine, you're basically engaging in medieval wellness therapy. Who needs a spa day when you've got Farmer Giles' prize mare snuffling under your floorboards? You nestle into the straw, pulling your cloak tighter, and realize this isn't half bad. The straw here is softer, springier, and blessedly free of the creepy-crawly legions that haunted your mattress. Sure, the risk of waking up with hay in your hair is high, but honestly, that's preferable to lice. And the soundscape? A lullaby of gentle chewing, the occasional stamp of a hoof, maybe a distant rooster auditioning for an early alarm clock. Beats the chorus of drunken snores any day. Of course, it's not all charm and coziness. There's the smell, pungent, earthy, insistent. It creeps into your clothes, your hair, your soul. And let's not gloss over the fire hazard. Stables were tinderboxes waiting to happen. Open flame near hay. That's a medieval horror story nobody wants to star in. Which is why many inns forbade candles in the loft, leaving you to navigate by moonlight or risk becoming a cautionary tale. And then there are the critters. Haylofts might dodge bedbugs, but they're prime real estate for mice, and where there are mice, cats follow. Imagine dozing peacefully when a cat sprints across your legs in hot pursuit of dinner. Adds excitement, sure, but not exactly the ASMR vibes you were going for. Still, the warmth is real. You can feel it sinking into your bones, radiating from the animals below, mingling with the insulating hug of straw. You close your eyes, thinking, this is it, the medieval hack I've been waiting for. And then, just as you drift off, a horse lets out a sigh so loud it rattles the rafters. You startle, laugh softly, and tuck your cloak tighter. If you're lucky, you'll make it through the night without hay fever. Fun fact. Yes, people suffered from it back then too. By dawn, you'll smell like you've been rolled in a meadow and lightly smoked, but you'll also be alive, which is more than can be said for some poor soul frozen solid in an upstairs room. Enjoy the barn life while you can, because tomorrow, the innkeeper's back with another warming trick, one that involves peat, charcoal, and a fine line between cozy and catastrophic. Ready to play with fire again? You wake to the soft rustle of hay and the warm musk of horse breath drifting up from below. Not the worst night of your life, honestly. A little scratchy, sure, and the stable cat definitely used your shin as a springboard at some point, but you're warm, and that's worth more than gold in this cold, damp world. Still, haylofts aren't always an option. Sometimes the stables are full, or the innkeeper's not in a generous mood. So what do you do then? Enter peat, charcoal, and a few tricks so bold they might just turn you into a cautionary tale. You trudge back into the main inn, and the smell hits you before the sight does. That dark, earthy tang? That's peat smoke, rich, acrid, and clinging to every beam like a stubborn ghost. In regions where wood was scarce, and trust me, by the later Middle Ages, timber shortages were real, innkeepers turned to alternative fuels. Peat was the MVP in places like Scotland, Ireland, and the Low Countries. Basically dried mud infused with plant matter, it was cut from bogs, stacked in neat little towers, and left to dry until it was ready to smolder for hours. Now, smolder is the key word here. Peat didn't roar like oak logs. It glowed, it sighed, It produced smoke in quantities that would make a chimney cry. And here's the kicker. Peat smoke had a personality. Pungent. Invasive. It didn't just fill the room, it moved in, redecorated, and left its scent on your clothes for weeks. People joked, or maybe they weren't joking, that you could sniff out a peat burner from half a mile away. Charcoal, on the other hand, was the premium option. It burned hotter, cleaner, and longer, but it wasn't cheap. Only inns with deeper pockets, or guests willing to pay extra, could afford to use it for overnight warmth. You'd see little iron braziers glowing like tiny captive suns, radiating heat in the center of a room. Sounds cozy, right? Until you remember one tiny problem: ventilation. Historians still argue how common carbon monoxide poisoning was, but let's just say when you're heating a poorly ventilated room with a pan of glowing coals, the risk skyrockets. People didn't understand the science, they just knew that sometimes, a cozy night by the brazier ended with a permanent nap. If you woke up in the morning with a splitting headache and no sense of humor, congratulations, you were halfway to disaster. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some innkeepers tried to stretch their fuel by mixing in dried dung. Yes, you heard that right, cow patties and horse droppings, sun-baked into rock-hard discs of budget heat. They burned fast, they burned dirty, and they produced a smell so unique it could peel the paint off your nostrils if paint had existed on these walls. People swore the smoke had healing properties. Spoiler alert, it didn't. You sit by the hearth, watching the peat crumble into glowing lumps, sparks winking like fireflies before they vanish into the dark. The room is thick with smoke, the kind that curls under your eyelids and scratches your throat. Everyone coughs, but nobody complains, because complaining doesn't make the cold go away. Instead, travelers crowd closer, huddling over mugs of ale, soaking up every whisper of heat from that stubborn, smoldering fuel. Sometimes, innkeepers got creative. They'd bank peat or embers under a mound of ash to keep them alive through the night, a trick called slack firing. Come morning, a quick poke, and voila, fire without striking flint. Ingenious, but risky. One careless move, and you're in turns into a funeral pyre with extra steps. And then there's the clandestine ember-sharing economy. Picture this. You're broke, you can't afford a full bed, but you need warmth. So you slip a coin to the potboy for a glowing ember wrapped in ash, carried to your corner in a little clay pot. You nestle it under a stool or behind a screen, whispering a prayer that it heats your bones without lighting your cloak on fire. Some called it clever, others called it madness. Probably both. The thing about peat and charcoal is they weren't just fuels, they were lifelines. Every ember represented a fragile pact with fire, enough to save you, too much and you're toast, literally. You watch the innkeeper rake the hearth, banking the last glowing lumps for tomorrow, and you wonder, is this really the best humanity can do? Then you remember last night's stable sweet and think, yeah, it probably is. Still, you can't help imagining something softer, richer, maybe a bed so lush it feels like sinking into a cloud. Not for you, of course, you're just a humble traveler. But for the nobles? Oh, they slept like kings. Literally. And their beds? They weren't straw, and they sure didn't smell like smoke. Ready for a taste of that world? Let's climb the ladder of luxury. You've spent nights on straw, nights wrapped in damp cloaks, and even one night marinating in horse breath, but now you're stepping into another universe entirely. Because while you've been wrestling with hay and peat smoke, someone else has been dozing on a bed so plush it could swallow small kingdoms whole. Welcome to the elite world of featherbeds. You catch your first glimpse when a chamber door creaks open on the upper floor of the inn. The room is dim, but what you see stops you cold. A massive wooden bed frame carved with vines and fleur-de-lis, draped in fabric like a soft fortress. And at its heart, a feather mattress so thick it looks alive, bulging and rippling like dough rising in a warm oven. This isn't just a bed, it's a status symbol with sheets. Feather beds were the medieval equivalent of a luxury sports car. If you had one, you weren't just comfortable, you were announcing to the world, "I've arrived." Goose feathers were the gold standard, though down feathers, the fine fluff beneath, were rarer and pricier still. Swans? Forget it. That was aristocracy on steroids. Historians still argue whether these mattresses were truly soft by modern standards or just less lumpy than straw. But contemporary descriptions gush about their comfort, comparing them to clouds, or at least the medieval idea of clouds, something lofty, light, and smugly unattainable. Here's a quirky tidbit. People believed feather beds could actually sap your strength if they were too soft. Medical texts warned against luxurious sloth, claiming that sinking into down for too long weakened the body and corrupted the soul. Basically, a featherbed was the devil's larzed boy. Did that stop anyone rich enough to afford one? Absolutely not. Now picture yourself sliding between sheets of fine linen, none of that coarse, scratchy stuff you've been suffering through. These sheets are smooth, cool, and embroidered with patterns so delicate they could make a modern influencer cry. Over you, a canopy looms, a literal roof for your bed, sometimes with curtains to block drafts or, let's be honest, to show off just how many colors your family could afford. Gold thread tassels? Oh yes. Beds weren't just furniture, they were theater. Of course, this dream suite came with a price tag bigger than a knight's ego. Feather beds were costly, both for materials and maintenance. Feathers had to be plucked, cleaned, and stuffed into ticks made of linen or fustian, then beaten regularly to keep them fluffy. Neglect them, and they'd clump like mashed turnips left out overnight. Servants might spend hours a week just plumping and airing them in the sun to keep rot and vermin at bay. Yes, even luxury beds could harbor lice if you got lazy. Wealth doesn't kill bugs, elbow grease does. And the blankets? Layer upon layer of wool, maybe topped with fur for those extra chilly nights. Ermine for royalty, squirrel for the upwardly mobile, rabbit for those who wanted the illusion of chic without breaking the purse. Throw in a few embroidered cushions, and you had a bed so opulent it made peasants write angry poems. But here's the irony. These decadent nests weren't common in roadside inns. Oh, some establishments had a lord's chamber reserved for nobles, bishops, or that one merchant who rolled up like Scrooge McDuck. If you were lucky, or very charming, you might talk your way in. But for the average traveler, you were still shackled to straw and prayer. You watch the chamber door close and imagine what it must feel like to sink into feathers after weeks of hard benches and smoky halls. Warmth without smoke, softness without scratching, privacy without the sound of a stranger's nasal symphony. It sounds like paradise. But then again, maybe paradise is boring. At least in the common room, you've got stories like that time your neighbor's bed warmer almost burned his hose off. Try beating that for dinner conversation in the noble suite. Still, the thought lingers as you trudge back to your humble pallet. Luxury changes everything. It rewrites the rules of warmth and comfort, makes survival look like art. And while you'll probably never own a featherbed, you've got something else to keep the chill away tonight, something brewed, spiced, and strong enough to make you forget your frozen toes. Ready to drink your blanket? Let's pour another round. The door to the inn's hall swings wide, and a wave of heat, not from a roaring fire but from bodies, laughter, and mugs sloshing with frothy ale, greets you like an old friend with questionable hygiene. You step inside, shake off the cold, and the scent of warm spices hits your nose. Cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, all swirling in a haze above the trestle tables. Tonight, warmth doesn't come from embers or straw. It comes from the inside out, and you're about to drink your way into a medieval hug. Mulled wine, hot ale, spiced mead. Call it what you want, but the formula hasn't changed much in centuries. Take a cheap drink, heat it until it steams, throw in a fistful of exotic spices, and boom, you've got the medieval version of a weighted blanket for your soul. And, honestly, in a world without Netflix or fleece hoodies, this was the next best thing. Historians still argue whether spicing drinks was purely about flavor or also about masking the taste of questionable brewing. Spoiler, probably both. But one thing's certain, hot alcohol wasn't just a comfort, it was medicinal, at least by the logic of the day. Medical texts insisted that warm drinks opened the humors, balanced your inner elements, and chased away the chill. Was it science? Not even close. But after your third cup, you stop caring about science anyway. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some places, people dropped roasted crabs, tiny wild apples, into their mulled ale, which popped and bobbed like little autumn fireworks. That concoction was called lambswool, supposedly because the froth reminded drinkers of, well, sheep fuzz. Honestly, if a modern bartender tried to serve you something named after livestock, you'd walk out. But in the Middle Ages, you'd raise your mug and ask for seconds. The best part? Warmed drinks were communal. Picture it, a massive pot hanging over the hearth, its surface shimmering with oil from the spices, a ladle ready to dip into your shared salvation. Everyone, from merchants to muddy travelers, crowded around like moths to a flickering lantern. You grab a wooden cup, wrap your numb fingers around it, and suddenly life feels less bleak. The heat seeps into your hands, curls through your chest, and softens your frozen bones. But let's not pretend this was all cozy vibes and cinnamon-scented dreams. Medieval booze packed a punch. Wine might be watered down, but ale? It wasn't your light Sunday lager. Combine that with an empty stomach and a long day on the road, and congratulations, you've invented the 14th century hangover. And because you're drinking it hot, the alcohol hits faster. You won't just fall asleep warm, you'll fall asleep hard. Sometimes, innkeepers leaned into the medicinal angle by tossing in extras: ginger for the stomach, honey for sweetness, even a dash of pepper for pep. Travelers swore it kept colds away, though what it really did was make you forget you were sleeping in a drafty room with someone snoring like a war horn 3 feet away. And then there were the toasts. Oh, the toasts. Every gulp came with a boast, a blessing, or a bawdy joke you probably wouldn't repeat in polite company. The hall rang with voices, laughter, the clatter of trenchers, the hiss of steam from the pot. For a moment, the world outside, the frost, the filth, the fatigue, vanishes. In here, you're warm, full of spice and swagger, and ready to believe the night might not be so bad after all. Of course, you eventually stagger upstairs, curl on your straw pallet, and realize something sobering: liquid warmth doesn't last. By dawn, the fire's out, the room's colder than a tax collector's heart, and your head feels like a blacksmith used it as an anvil. But hey, worth it, probably. Still, drink wasn't the only internal heating system in the medieval arsenal. Because if there's one thing people in the Middle Ages knew, it's that where one body shivers, 2 bodies survive. Ready to share some heat the old-fashioned way? Grab your cloak and your personal space issues, because the next trick involves getting cozy with strangers. You wake up with a tongue like parchment and a vague memory of singing about St. George at the top of your lungs. But never mind that, because now you're learning the simplest, most awkward heating hack the medieval world ever invented: body heat. Not in a romantic, candlelight way. No, this is pure math. More people in one bed equals more warmth, period. You shuffle into the common room and glance toward the sleeping pallets. It's like a human tapestry, limbs tangled, cloaks draped, snores harmonizing in minor keys. This is what passes for central heating in an age without radiators. One fire, 50 bodies, and enough shared misery to make everyone a little more forgiving about elbow etiquette. Historians still argue how widespread bed sharing really was. Some claim it was standard practice in crowded inns, others insist it happened only in the cheapest dives. But the evidence piles up in old account books and travelers' tales: 2 pennies for a shared bed, 4 men to a blanket, And my favorite, a stranger at my back all night, God save me. Sounds fun, right? Here's your quirky tidbit. Some inns even charged per person, per space. Meaning, if you wanted the middle of the bed, you paid extra because that was the warmest spot. The edge. Discounted, along with a side of draft and the occasional rat cameo. It's basically the medieval version of economy seating. Now, let's talk logistics. These weren't your memoryfoam wonders with personalized support. Picture a lumpy sack stuffed with straw or chaff, maybe a woolen blanket that smelled like it had seen things because it had. Privacy? None. Pajamas? Also none, unless you count the one crusty linen shirt you've been wearing since Tuesday. This is a world where sleeping arrangements doubles as team-building exercise. You crawl into your assigned spot, wedged between a wiry man who snores like a war drum and a merchant who mumbles in his sleep about unpaid debts. At first, you try to keep to your edge, clinging to a strip of blanket like a medieval security blanket. But as the cold creeps in, through the cracked shutters, through the gaps in the thatch, you surrender. Inch by inch, you shuffle closer. So does everyone else. And before you know it, you're one vertebra away from calling this a group hug. The heat builds slowly, like bread rising under a cloth. It's not glamorous, but it works. Scientists today would call it shared thermal energy. You call it better than freezing. There's a rhythm to it, a shifting of limbs, a grunt when someone's foot goes rogue, a whispered curse when the blanket slides to the floor. Someone always hogs the covers. Human nature is eternal. Was it safe? Well, safe-ish. The risk of fleas, lice, and the occasional dagger-wielding bedmate loomed large. But for most travelers, warmth outweighed the weirdness. After all, freezing to death is a lot worse than spooning a stranger named Ulrich who smells faintly of turnips. And here's the kicker. Body heat didn't just keep you alive, it forged alliances. Business deals were struck in those beds, secrets traded, rumors born. You might wake up with frost in your beard, but you also might wake up with a new travel companion or, if you're unlucky, a new lawsuit. Still, no amount of human insulation could fix everything. The drafts were relentless, and those warped wooden shutters might as well have been open invitations to the night air. You're warm now, sure, but tomorrow? Tomorrow your socks might freeze stiff. Let's climb out of this bed and face the real enemy, architecture. You peel yourself out of the human heat pile, legs tingling like you've wrestled an octopus all night, and what greets you? A gust of air so sharp it feels like a dagger to the soul. You glance toward the shuttered window and laugh. Well, you would, if your teeth weren't chattering like castanets. This is the medieval inn's biggest betrayal. The walls may keep out wolves, but the wind, it strolls in like it owns the place. The problem starts with the windows, or rather, the medieval attempt at windows. Glass exists, sure, but it's a luxury, a shiny dream for cathedrals and nobles' halls. Here, in your humble inn, you've got wooden shutters, maybe a stretched oiled cloth if the owner's feeling fancy. And drafts? Oh, they slip through every crack, every gap, every badly fitted hinge like gossip at a wedding feast. Historians still argue whether medieval builders truly cared about insulation or just figured blankets will sort it out. Some point to layered walls stuffed with moss or clay, others claim that even good timber frames couldn't tame the wind. What no one denies is this: if you were inside an inn in January, you were still on speaking terms with frostbite. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some travelers actually stuffed their own clothes into the gaps between shutters before bed, shirts, hose, even a spare shoe or two. Picture that. You're lying there, one leg bare because your breeches are crammed into a window crack like some desperate thermal sacrifice. Did it work? Marginally. But hey, when the alternative is icicles forming on your earlobes, you improvise. And don't get me started on the floors. Cold stone or warped planks, both radiating chill like they were designed to ruin your life. Drop a jug of water overnight. By morning, it's an ice sculpture. Leave your socks, woolen, thick, your pride and joy on the floor. Frozen stiff, like they've been cursed by a very petty wizard. You shuffle closer to the hearth for comfort, but the fire's just a sulking pile of embers. It died hours ago, long before you finished dreaming about roast goose and feather beds. The room smells of smoke and damp wool, and your breath curls in little clouds. At this point, you're pretty sure warmth is a myth invented by troubadours to keep hope alive. And let's not forget the roof. Thatched, yes, which means that in theory it holds some heat, but mostly it acts like a giant sieve for drafts. If it rains, the drops sneak through like tiny spies. You pull your cloak tighter and mutter something impolite about medieval architects. Now, there's one bright side: you're not alone in your misery. The whole room stirs in the blue-grey dawn, everyone groaning, stamping feet, slapping arms to coax the blood back into circulation. One man lifts his boots and finds frost rimming the soles. Another pokes at the embers and mutters about paying extra next time for a spot closer to the hearth. Good luck with that, friend, there's a waiting list. You, on the other hand, know the truth. No fire, no blanket, no communal snuggle can fully defeat this cold. So what do? You get creative. Maybe you recite charms. Maybe you tuck herbs under your pillow, trusting in old wives' tales. After all, when architecture fails, superstition steps up like the quirky cousin who means well. Ready to explore the strange, fragrant world of medieval warming magic? Let's dive into herbs, charms, and the cozy side of folklore. You retreat from the frozen shutters and sinking floorboards, teeth chattering like an eager woodpecker. If the fire's dead and your socks have turned into medieval ice pops, what's left? Faith. Not necessarily the cathedral kind, though plenty of travelers muttered a prayer or two, but the small, homespun faith in charms, herbs, and rituals whispered from grandmother to granddaughter across kitchen tables. You dig into your pack and find them: a pouch of rosemary sprigs, dried lavender, maybe a pinch of sage. These aren't just garnish for stew, they're your last line of defense against the cold. You tuck the herbs under your straw tick, their scent rising like a memory of warmer summers. The theory? Certain plants carry heat in their very nature. Rosemary burns hot in fire, so it must, somehow, transmit that fiery virtue to your bones. Makes sense, if you squint hard enough. Historians still argue whether people truly believed herbs could warm bodies, or if it was more about masking the stench of too many humans in one bed. Probably both. After all, nothing says sweet dreams like rosemary mixed with odor unwashed traveler. Still, the practice left its mark. Some herbals from the period gush about the spirited heat of thyme or marjoram, promising to drive out cold humors. You may not know your humors from your elbow, but you'll try anything at this point. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some folks swore by stuffing a dried hedgehog skin under the mattress for warmth. Yes, really. Why? Because hedgehogs curl tight, and in medieval logic, that meant they held heat. Forget central heating, imagine carrying a spiny talisman in your luggage like some prickly thermal charm. Charms weren't just plant-based. Coins, bells, and carved amulets often hung above beds, muttered over with rhymes like cold away, warmth stay, keep the frost from where I lay. Was it science? No. Was it comforting? Absolutely. And in a drafty room where even the moonlight feels icy, comfort counts for a lot. Sometimes, the rituals were practical with a mystical gloss. For instance, sprinkling salt on the threshold before bed. It wasn't really about heat, it was about warding off spirits blamed for the chill. But hey, salt also discouraged pests, so two birds, one superstition. And don't overlook the role of color. A scarlet thread tied around the wrist. That was thought to draw fire into the body. In truth, it probably just reminded you that your wrist was still attached, which, in this cold, felt like a victory. Picture it now, the common room glowing dim with embers, travelers whispering blessings over little cloth sachets, someone chanting softly as they circles the hearth with a sprig of basil. It's a scene equal parts eerie and tender, like a lullaby hummed against the roar of winter. These rituals may not have shifted the temperature, but they gave something just as vital, a sense of control in a world where the cold could kill you before dawn. But charms and herbs could only do so much. When warmth was a commodity, innkeepers turned into salesmen with the instincts of wolves and the smiles of saints. You think modern hotels love their premium upgrades? Wait until you see the medieval version of "Would you like embers with that?" Let's talk about the hustle behind the hearth. You've stuffed rosemary under your bedding, tied a scarlet thread on your wrist, and maybe even whispered a rhyme that sounded like something from a badly translated spellbook. Does it work? Not really. But the innkeeper? Oh, he's grinning like a cat in a dairy barn, because this is his favorite game, turning your desperation into hard coin. The hustle starts subtle. He leans against the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag that's probably older than you, and murmurs, "Cold tonight, eh?" You nod, teeth clattering. He sighs, like he truly feels your pain, then gestures toward the hearth. Few good embers left there. Could heap them on your brazier. For a price. And that, right there, is medieval upselling. Want extra wood? That'll cost you. More straw for your bed. Sitting. An actual wool blanket. Congratulations, you've entered the VIP tier of medieval warmth. Historians still argue whether these charges were standardized or improvised on the spot, but surviving records hint that prices for luxuries like blankets could double or triple during harsh winters. Capitalism didn't start with corner offices, it started with cold toes. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some inns rented out heated stones in linen wraps, the same ones they used in wealthier homes for bed warming. A stone service, if you will. Imagine that, paying extra to borrow a chunk of rock someone else already drooled on. But you'd do it, wouldn't you? Of course you would, because hypothermia is a persuasive salesman. Now, for the pièce de résistance, the brazier scam. A brazier is basically a portable fire pit iron, charcoal, glowing like a dragon's sigh. The innkeeper offers to set one in your room for a modest sum. Sounds cozy, right? Except here's the twist. Too much charcoal in a small, unventilated room can kill you faster than frostbite. Carbon monoxide poisoning wasn't in the vocabulary yet, so when someone didn't wake in the morning, folks blamed bad luck, demons, or a curse, never realizing the culprit was a lungful of invisible doom. But most nights, it worked. You pay, he lugs in a brazier, and suddenly the room feels less like a meat locker. The glow paints the walls in molten orange, shadows dance like goblins, and for a moment you feel like royalty until the coals die out halfway through the night, because, surprise, you only paid for a half fill. Want more? That's another coin, friend. And the upsell didn't stop with heat. The innkeeper might throw in a package deal, brazier plus mulled ale, for an extra penny. Or maybe he offers the coveted spot nearest the common hearth, where you can roast like a smug little chestnut while latecomers glare at you from the icy corners. It's the original premium seating plan, and you'd better believe people fought for it. Of course, some travelers tried to cheat the system, sneaking embers up to their rooms, borrowing firewood, or cozying up to the kitchen made in hopes of a free log or two. But the innkeeper knew every trick in the book, because he wrote half of them. He'd spot the bulging cloak, the suspicious glow in your eyes, and slap a fine on you faster than you can say, "I wasn't stealing, I was redistributing warmth." By the time you finally crawl under your threadbare blanket, wallet lighter, conscience heavier, you realize something. Warmth in this world isn't just physical. It's a commodity, a status symbol, a fragile blessing guarded by men with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. And yet, for all the hustles and haggles, you've survived another night. Almost. Because tomorrow brings the longest, coldest stretch yet, the kind of winter travel that makes you dream of deserts and curses the invention of seasons. But don't fret. There's one last weapon left in the arsenal, one trick as old as storytelling itself, the power of words to keep the chill at bay. Let's end our journey where every good medieval night truly ended, in the glow of shared tales by the fire. The inn settles into that hushed hour before dawn when even the mice seem too tired to scurry. The fire is little more than a sulking red eye in the hearth, its heat fading like a rumor, and your bones ache with the kind of cold that seeps straight into your soul. But then, someone clears their throat. A low voice, raspy with age or ale, begins to spin a story. You lean in, because words have weight in this world. In a time before central heating, before fleece-lined anything, warmth wasn't just about glowing coals or woolen layers. It was about distraction, about laughter rippling through a drafty hall, about holding on to something brighter than the frost clawing at the shutters. The tale is classic: a knight, a dragon, and a wager so reckless it makes your toes curl. You've heard versions before, but that's the beauty, each telling comes out different, flavored by the teller's accent, their gestures, the way their eyes flick toward the fire when they describe flames licking the sky. Around you, heads lift from bedrolls, faces softened by the dance of embers. For a few precious minutes, everyone forgets the cold. Historians still argue whether these fireside stories were just entertainment or a survival mechanism. I'd say both. Words could rally morale, knit strangers into companions, and just maybe make the cold feel like a backdrop instead of a death sentence. In fact, some records hint at warmth feasts where storytelling, singing, and drinking were prescribed remedies for winter's bite. Medieval wellness retreat, anyone? Here's your quirky tidbit. Some inns even hired warming jesters, performers who cracked jokes, sang bawdy tunes, and roasted guests harder than the hearth-roasted chestnuts. Their job wasn't just fun, it was function. Laughter sparks movement, clapping, stomping feet, a room alive with energy. The body follows where the spirit leads, and a good belly laugh beats frostbite 9 times out of 10. Tonight, the tales roll on. Someone adds a ghost story, thin and sharp as icicles, about a traveler who stole embers and vanished into a snowstorm, his footsteps trailing sparks. Another weaves a love ballad so sweet it could melt the icicles clinging to the rafters. You even join in, mumbling a joke about how the only dragon you've seen so far is the landlord guarding his ale barrel. It earns a laugh, and just like that, you feel a flicker of heat blooming inside you. No herbs, no hot stones, no feather bed could match this kind of warmth, the kind spun from shared voices, the steady glow of human presence against a hostile night. When at last the room drifts toward silence, you curl under your blanket, not much warmer in body, but infinitely richer in spirit. The wind still prowls outside, but you've stolen its power. For a while, at least. And now, as the inn's timbers creak and the fire sighs into darkness, your eyelids grow heavy. The cold is still there, sure, but softer somehow, tamed by the oldest trick of all, togetherness. So sleep, traveler. Tomorrow will be another road, another fire, another story. But for now, let the night keep you. The voices fade, leaving only the soft hush of winter pressing against the walls. Imagine it now, the last ember in the hearth glowing like a tiny heartbeat, the air still scented faintly with smoke and rosemary. Your breath slows. Your shoulders ease. You're no longer thinking about cracked shutters or hustling innkeepers or that poor hedgehog someone once thought could keep a bed warm. All of that drifts away like mist curling off a frosty field. You picture your own bed, soft, safe, silent, and realize how lucky you are not to share it with 6 strangers and a rat named Gerald. The hum of your fan, the glow of your lamp, luxuries that would have made a medieval traveler weep with gratitude. You've walked through their world tonight, felt the bite of their winters, the scrape of their straw mattresses, the relief of finding a spark of heat in the bleakest hours. And now, you get to slip into comfort without haggling for embers or whispering charms to ward off frost spirits. Take one deep breath, then another. Let the weight of history settle like a heavy, warm cloak over your shoulders. You're safe, you're warm, and you've earned your rest. Tomorrow will come soon enough, but for now, the night is yours, quiet, steady, endless as a snowfield under starlight. Sleep well, dream kindly, and remember, warmth is never just heat. It's story, connection, hope. And you've had all three tonight. Sweet dreams, traveler.